journey of hope. On one beautiful spring morning, with blooming flowers and air filled with the scent of hope, Emily was sitting on an old wooden chair on the wide porch of her house. A 28-year-old woman with classic American features, her long hair waving with the morning breeze. She was reflecting on her life, which had been turned upside down suddenly, recalling the past and trying to envision the future. Emily was born and raised in a traditional family living in a quiet neighborhood. She was the closest to her father's heart since childhood, and her mother loved her dearly. But life did not go as Emily had wished. She lost her father at the age of 4, and her mother passed away during her 3rd year of high school. Shortly after her mother's death, her siblings' treatment towards her changed. They began to treat her harshly and could not stand her staying in the house. The problem started when her younger brother, Michael, insisted on marrying her off as quickly as possible so he could take their father's apartment to get married in. One day, he invited his boss over for lunch and asked his sisters to help Emily with the cooking. Emily thought they wanted her to fulfill the duty of hosting, but she later discovered that he was planning to marry her off to a man who was 42 years old, while she had not yet reached 20. She refused strongly and said, "How do you expect me to marry a man twice my age? I want to continue my education." But Michael did not listen and dragged her by her hair, saying, "You will marry him whether you like it or not. You have no say here." Emily was determined to refuse, but her siblings ganged up on her, beat her, and accused her of not being chaste and afraid to get married to avoid being exposed. She decided to accept the marriage to get rid of their abuse and prove her chastity. On her wedding day, she discovered her husband's true character, whom we will call John. He had shown kindness during the short engagement period, but after the marriage, he treated her with brutality, humiliated her, insulted her, and beat her for no reason. Emily endured all of this until she discovered she was pregnant. John's treatment suddenly changed, and he started caring for her and treating her kindly during the pregnancy. In the 4th month, she found out she was expecting twins, which made John very happy. But Emily was sad because she knew no one would help her raise the children. She gave birth to her twins and returned home to find that John had reverted to his cruel personality. She later learned that he was married to another woman, Sarah, who could not have children, and that he married Emily solely to have children. After 7 years of marriage, she suffered the worst treatment from John and Sarah in front of her children. They beat her and tortured her until she almost lost her life. She managed to escape and seek refuge in her father's house, but her siblings were waiting for her, beat her, and threw her out. Walking down the street crying about her situation, she eventually got tired and sat down to rest. An elderly lady approached and asked her what was wrong. Emily told her everything, and the lady, who introduced herself as Mrs. Mary, invited Emily to stay with her until she could find a solution to her problem. Mrs. Mary was a kind-hearted woman who treated Emily like her own daughter and was happy to have her company. She provided her with clothes, food, and a sense of security. Emily began to tell Mrs. Mary her painful story, from the death of her mother, the harsh treatment by her siblings, her marriage to a ruthless man, to her escape from her hellish life. Emily found warmth and safety in Mrs. Mary's embrace, which she had missed for so long, and cried for a long time until she felt some relief. Mrs. Mary listened to her with love and compassion, comforting her and assuring her that God would compensate her for all she had endured. Days passed, and Mrs. Mary continued to treat Emily with kindness, trying to make up for the hardships she had faced in her life. One day, Emily heard a knock on the door. When she opened it, she found Mrs. Mary's daughters. They asked harshly, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" "Mom, this girl is wearing your pajamas." Mrs. Mary interrupted them, saying, "Girls, be polite. She is a guest here." Emily felt very embarrassed and ran to her room, feeling scared and sad. She overheard the daughters questioning their mother. "How could you bring a stranger into our home? What if she steals from you or harms you?" Mrs. Mary firmly replied, "Stop it. She is a good girl from a decent family. It's shameful to speak like that." Later, Mrs. Mary came to Emily's room, looking tired. She handed Emily a key and a piece of paper with an address and said, "Emily, my daughters seem to be staying for a while, and I feel I might fall ill again. I'm worried about you, and I can't guarantee what my daughters might do if I get sick and fall into a coma. Take this key and address. It's for an apartment I bought some time ago, and none of my children know about it. Don't worry, the apartment is fully furnished. Go there and stay and take this money with you. Stay in touch and don't mention that the apartment is mine. If anyone asks, say you own it." Mrs. Mary acted this way because she felt she might die. Emily packed her belongings and went to the apartment. When she entered, she found a table with the property deed in her name, a large sum of money, and a letter written in Mrs. Mary's handwriting. "I knew my daughters would stay for a while, and I felt weak, knowing I might die. I wrote this apartment in your name, put the money in the bank, and spend from its interest. Pray for me when I die. My daughters might forget, but I know you won't. God bless you, my dear, and make you as happy as you made me in the short time you lived with me. I wished you were my daughter." Emily was shocked after reading Mrs. Mary's words and broke down in tears. She felt a deep pain in her heart for Mrs. Mary, knowing she wouldn't see her again and would miss the motherly love she felt with her. After a week, unable to bear it, Emily went to check on Mrs. Mary and found out from the doorman that she had fallen into a coma and was taken to the hospital. Emily rushed to the hospital and was shocked to find none of Mrs. Mary's daughters there. She begged the nurse to let her in to see and bid farewell to Mrs. Mary after learning her condition was critical. Emily spoke to Mrs. Mary, thanking her for everything she had done, thinking Mrs. Mary couldn't hear her. Suddenly, she felt Mrs. Mary's hand caress her head. She looked at her with joy and heard her say, "What my heart felt happened, and my children abandoned me again. But this time I feel it's the end. Don't give the apartment to any of my children. It's yours. They have plenty, but I know they're greedy. May God bless you and give you strength and happiness in life." These were her last words before she passed away. Emily was devastated by Mrs. Mary's death, and her children didn't allow her to attend the funeral. She returned to her apartment, remembering Mrs. Mary and praying for her, grateful for the security she provided and the apartment she never dreamed of having. She was deeply saddened by not seeing her again, yet thankful for God's compensation. After some time, Emily recovered from the shock of losing Mrs. Mary and decided to work and invest the money she had left for her. She took half the money and opened a bridal gown rental and sales shop. The business grew and became well known with multiple branches, and she was blessed with great success. Yet, her happiness was incomplete as she longed to see her children and hold them in her arms. One day, A bride came to book her wedding dress and requested to meet the owner. Emily went to meet them and was shocked to see the groom's mother was her older sister, Sarah. Sarah looked at Emily in shock, seeing her dressed in expensive brands, adorned with gold, and looking much better. Sarah, with a hint of greed in her eyes, said, "Emily, is it really you? Where have you been for the last 3 years? We thought you were dead." She approached to hug her, but Emily pushed her away, refusing the hug, and said, "Now you remember I'm your sister? You come to hug me? You treated me as a maid. Where were you when you were beating me with our brothers?" Sarah replied, "You're the one who ran away from your husband and left your children." Emily closed her eyes, holding back her anger, and said, "Don't call him my husband. He's a monster, and I divorced him. He's no longer my husband, and I'll get my children back. I was waiting to stand on my own feet to provide for them, and I've already filed a case to get them soon." Emily refused to give Sarah the dress and kicked them out, humiliating her in front of her son's fiancé's family. 2 weeks later, Emily's siblings showed up at her shop, all full of greed, pretending to care and worry about her. Her younger brother, Michael, slyly said, "Emily, I turned the world upside down looking for you, my dear. We wanted you to keep your home and children. We were harsh for your own good. We missed you, Emily. Thank God you're safe." Emily smartly replied, "Really? You cared about me?" They all replied, thinking she believed their lies. "Of course, Emily, you're our sister, not just a sibling." Emily said, "All right, I want to see my children." Her younger brother replied, "Your children are living and being raised well. Don't worry about them, but it's hard for you to take them. You know their father is a difficult man." Emily responded, "No, I know you work for him and are afraid of losing your job, which is why you sold your sister out. You all sold me out for your own gain and his money. You didn't think about your sister and threw me out on the street. I hate you all and will never forgive you. Now I'm richer than their father who you sold me out for, and I have connections that can ruin you all. I'll get my children back soon, legally. I have no siblings and don't want to see your faces again." She threw them out and sat remembering the painful memories with them, their torture, and how God helped her triumph over them, letting her kick them out and stand up for herself for the first time, taking part of her right. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ringing phone. It was her lawyer. He said, "Mrs. Emily, I have great news. Tomorrow we will go to get your children." Her eyes filled with tears of joy. She couldn't believe she would finally see them and have them in her arms again. The next day, Emily went to get her children, seeing their father's eyes filled with humiliation, fear, and shock. In his stupidity and shock, he shouted, "Where did you get the money, the car, and all these things from? You must have been doing something wrong. Who did this for you? You sold yourself." Emily looked at the lawyer and said, "Doesn't this deserve a defamation case?" The lawyer replied, "Leave him to me. I'll have him imprisoned for this." The lawyer filed a defamation case against him, and he was sentenced to a year in prison. He came to the boutique, begging her and kneeling to kiss her feet, asking for forgiveness and mercy from prison. Emily remembered Mrs. Mary's prayers for her before she died, and she refused him, pushing him away, saying, "You didn't show mercy when I begged at your feet. Those who don't show mercy will not be shown mercy. Get out of here." Emily began to care for her children and make up for the time they were away from her. Her life began to stabilize and improve, living happily while trying to forget the painful past. She continued to grow her business and build a brighter future, with her children by her side. And so my story ends. I hope you liked it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to receive all that is new. Have a nice day.